Jen, I think the mics are hot.
I think we're ready to go.
Yeah. All right. So ask me what I'm excited about or not excited about, actually, to have in this conversation.
Okay. So what are you not excited to talk about?
We should probably tell people who we're talking to, though.
Yes. Do you know?
His name is Andrew Rush, not Andy.
Correct.
Co-founder of
Starcatcher.
Starcatcher.
It's a space company.
In Jacksonville, Florida.
Right here in Jacksonville.
Which is kind of amazing.
I'm still waiting for you to tell me what you're not excited
Okay, yeah,
to talk about.
okay. So, well, let me tell you what I am excited to talk about. I want to hear how somebody gets an idea and then finds funding to make that idea happen.
Yeah.
That to me is a mystery. You might as well have said to me, I spotted a rainbow and at the end was a pot of money. And then the company started.
Picking the winning lottery numbers.
But I'm sure there's more to it.
I would assume so.
Yeah. And the other thing that makes me nervous is I'm imagining a scenario where I'm sitting out looking at the stars with my son. I go, that's Orion's belt over here. And then over there is the McDonald's logo in space. And I think the commercialization of space, it makes me apprehensive.
Okay.
And I want to touch on that.
Okay. Well, just as a reminder, this is not about you. This is about Andrew.
Okay, fine.
We might allow you to have a few questions in there to get your needs met.
Okay. What about you? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'm obsessed with space. I mean, I know nothing. I have a telescope that you can push a button and it will point you to a place in the sky where you want to see something.
You have a telescope where you can push a button?
I do. And not just to look at my next door neighbors either. I can see the stars.
Well, will it, if you push a button, will it look at the neighbors?
I can't disclose that.
Okay, gotcha.
I can't disclose that. But no, I'm really excited to have this space conversation. And maybe I'm falsely labeling Andrew as he knows everything space related.
He does. No, he does.
I'm going to go with the assumption.
Do that.
Let's see how he feels about it.
Okay. Oh, hey.
Hi there.
All right. So tell us a little bit about Starcatcher. And then we're going to get to know the real Andrew, the goalkeeper, the pole vaulter, all those details.
So Starcatcher is a company founded to build the world's first power grid in space. The reason that we're focused on building the world's first power grid in space is that I am a multi-time entrepreneur in the space industry, and every mission I've ever been involved with in space is constrained by what we call SWAP, size, weight, and power. And over the last 5 or 10 years, we've seen the aperture around size and weight open up because we have reusable rockets now.
Yeah.
Rocket Lab, SpaceX, Blue Origin have these magnificent vehicles that go up and we then come back and we reuse them again. And that's really brought down the launch cost to send things to space. But power is still a huge constraint. We still basically go on these camping trips to space where you kind of bring your solar panels with you, you get the power that those generate. If you need more power, you're kind of out of luck. But at the same time, we want to do all these amazing things in space, more and more things. We want to give you, 4K YouTube videos direct from satellites to your cell phone. We want to do edge computing in space to power orbital data centers and allow satellites to be smarter, to operate more freely. We want to defend the nation and the world using satellites in space, and we want them to be highly maneuverable. All those things need a lot more power than is available from your average satellite with their solar rays just pointing at the one naked sun. So at Starcatcher, we're building a system to collect, concentrate, and beam essentially solar energy to those satellites to enable them to have more power, higher concentrations of power, power in eclipse.
It seems like this is going to solve many problems. There's a lot of use cases for why you would want to have this endless supply of power in space. Does Starcatcher have a specific mission that they want to achieve within this lifetime?
Yeah, I am personally and professionally motivated to enable people to do more in space and to do new things in space. And my co-founders alongside of me share in that desire. And we really think that in order to settle a place, in order to commercialize a new place or industrialize a new place on the planet, you need infrastructure.
Mhm.
And so on Earth, that's basically roads and power infrastructure.
Right.
We're not really building highways to space, but our highways, metaphorically, are the rockets that SpaceX and Blue Origin and Rocket Lab and all these people build.
Yeah.
And we at Starcatcher, we're going to build that power grid in space so that it's as simple in space to settle or open a business or operate a business from a power perspective as it is on the ground, right? Like if you open a new McDonald's here on planet Earth.
It had to be McDonald's.
Yeah, that's right. So we're sponsorship pending. You know, they just plug into the local power grid. Or if you have a new startup, you move into a WeWork and you just plug your laptop in and your buddies plug their laptops in and you work. You don't worry about power.
Right.
And that's what we want to create.
So can we actually get into the details of the technology really quick? Like, so how does what's kindergarten level? What's the concept here? How do you beam solar power from a machine to another machine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially what we are doing is putting kind of mirrors and magnifying glasses in space that collect energy from the sun. And then we kind of exclude some of the wavelengths that aren't compatible with solar arrays, but we just redirect that energy and maybe increase the concentration of it to send that to a satellite's existing solar array. Solar arrays are really cool. They are band gap semiconductors. You know, that will be the longest word I say.
I know what that is.
Yeah. But basically what that means is, you know, if you send a certain number of photons at a solar array, it will generate a certain amount of power. If you like send 5 times those number of photons, 5 times that amount of light to that solar array.
So you're mimicking the solar array, like you're mimicking the sunlight.
We're taking the sunlight from the sun,
creating the
and then just redirecting it, like concentrating and redirecting it to a client spacecraft that's, 100, 500, 2,000 kilometers away.
That sounds dangerous. What are the risks involved with that?
Yeah, it's really, they're really just LED flashlights in space. Our sun, obviously every solar eclipse that comes around, we tell all the elementary school kids, don't stare at the sun.
Right.
So we're sending really just like a highly concentrated, focused kind of flashlight that we're beaming to another spacecraft at levels that it can generate more energy, but aren't going to harm it in any way. And if it goes all the way down to the Earth, well, we have this great atmosphere that absorbs a ton of the energy. And so it wouldn't be harmful to folks on the Earth either.
Okay. Do you guys have competition? Are you the only ones doing this?
So this idea was kind of grew out of us studying something called space-based solar power, which is a very old concept. One of the really cool things about the space industry is that science fiction writers have been writing about all the cool things that we're going to do in space one day.
For sure.
For literally decades longer than we could even go to space. Right. So space-based solar power is goes back to Arthur C. Clarke and famous science fiction writers like that. And that concept is to collect a bunch of energy with big solar arrays in space, turn that into like microwaves and like beam that down to some place on the planet. That's really technically challenging, really dangerous, but could be a way to be totally, oil independent and power cities, countries, whatever.
Yeah.
So we were looking at that. We're like, that's really interesting. We don't think the technology is here yet, but where else are people power constrained? Yeah. Which kind of gets back to satellites. And so we developed the concept and to focus, pardon the pun, on satellites. There are a few folks in Canada and the UK, and then one smaller company out in LA that are, also kind of focusing on power beaming either to other satellites or to the lunar surface. Okay. But we're particularly proud of the way that we're approaching the technology because we're putting a lot of emphasis on making it so it's kind of backward compatible. Okay. So our customers don't have to retrofit, don't have to buy a custom receiver from us.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. Because that's always a barrier to adoption.
Of course.
Right?
People think, oh, great, I want to use this, but now I have to go spend more money because I have to retrofit that to whatever I have.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, people kind of come along and say, hey, buy my gas cap so that I can refuel you. It's like, well, why would I waste money on a gas cap if there's no gas station?
Right.
And that's that's the hurdle that we're overcoming by sending energy that existing solar arrays on existing satellites are compatible with.
And where are you in the process? Because you guys launched
Yeah.
last year.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we announced the company and a seed round of funding in July of 2024, which feels like an eon ago and yesterday.
Completely
in
understand.
startup land.
Yeah.
7 months ago.
Yeah, basically. And we, there were 3 of us then. Today we have 33 folks that work for us. Almost all of them are here in Jacksonville, off Phillips Highway.
Okay.
And we're really just cranking. I'm super proud of the team. They've really like come together, gelled really well, and have just started like building. So we have all these really amazing ground prototypes that we've shown off. And
Are they all just engineers that you've hired pretty much?
So there's, of the 33, I think there are 4, maybe 5 of us that are not engineers. So I tell folks, I'm like, look, I'm basically like the general manager of a sports team. It's my job to like put the right people, in the locker room and then resource them so that they can go win championships. Yeah. And so that's what we're trying to do.
You're the Ted Lasso of space.
I think that's the kindest thing anybody's ever said to me on a podcast. Thank you.
So let's talk about seed funding.
Yeah.
Can you explain that process? Like you have an idea,
right?
You go to investors and they go, we're signing you a check.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. So to raise a seed round, really to build a company, there's a lot of different approaches, right? Like you can bootstrap it. That's what we did with our first company, Made in Space. Mm-hmm. You can kind of partner with different forms of capital.
Yeah.
So Redwire, which is the kind of the second space company I've been involved with, like growing, was backed by a private equity firm.
Right.
And then we, used their capital to build something really amazing. Redwire is a public company. It's a unicorn now. And so venture-backed companies, you're partnering with venture capitalists that are looking for, they really want that like 10 or 100x return.
Yeah.
That's what their goal is. And at the seed stage, they're really looking at a couple of 3 things. They're looking at team, like who are the founding folks? Like, why do I think they can do this grand vision that they have?
And at this point, you have credibility. You've got at least you said like 1 company underneath your belt. Is that right?
2.
2. Okay.
2. Yeah. So from a team, so on the team side, it's like, okay, are these guys just where are they exceptional? From a technology perspective, from a hey, they've done this before perspective, or other differentiating factors. Then kind of the market, like the total addressable market.
Right.
How big do we think this is going to be when it gets to scale? And then a go-to-market strategy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you have this grand vision. You want to create a power grid in space.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, what are the concrete steps that you're gonna execute to start eating that elephant one bite at a time?
Right.
And space is a sector that we're not wanting for grand visions. We're not wanting for people that have like been really successful and done lots of things, mm-hmm. but kind of taking a grand vision and breaking it down into digestible chunks, and that provide value to customers along the way, or proof points to get folks to attract more capital. That's where kind of the rubber meets the road. So we, worked on that package, and honestly, so one of my co-founders, we have a little bit of a superpower. One of my co-founders is a former venture capitalist.
Okay.
So he has this extensive Rolodex, and then myself and my third co-founder, Mike Snyder, he was the CTO of Redwire. He was the chief engineer at Made in Space. And now he's the CTO at Starcatcher. So we've built a couple of companies successfully together.
You have the trust.
Yeah. And sometimes we sometimes we're like a little bit of an old married couple, but but in the good way and the bad way, right? Like we work really well together, and it's a great.
But sometimes somebody's sleeping on the sofa.
Yeah. Sometimes I forgot to get the milk or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And so we basically we put together a really good package of materials, really tried to refine our pitch. And we talked to a whole bunch of folks, a whole bunch of VCs.
Yeah.
And we start honestly, of different kind of areas, different interests, different funding, funding availability, and just refine that pitch. I mean, we did probably 200 meetings in less than a month.
I was just going to ask, Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And that's pretty typical. If you want to drive and be successful with it, it's an endurance race.
Right.
But it's an endurance race where you have to smile and say the same jokes every time. Like it was the most clever thing that you've ever thought of.
Oh, that's so exhausting.
And also just like show like, hey, I have the conviction for this thing that I want to do.
Yeah.
And we know how to do it. And you have to kind of keep that energy level up because that's what the idea deserves. And hopefully it's inspiring enough to keep you there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. No, that makes a whole lot of sense. It's like relentless perseverance, and they need to see that. It needs to be tangible.
That's right.
They're going to torture you in order to give you that money.
How receptive were the people you spoke to?
I felt very fortunate that most folks really got it. It's just from like a kind of a visceral perspective, like power grid in space or supercharger network in space, it's like logical on its face. Logical and or intriguing. And so that got folks to be willing to talk to us. And we were fortunate to find, really, really good partners that, had high conviction in us, that had some knowledge of space. They weren't just like, which way is space?
Which way is space though?
All the ways. And either had like really good kind of domain expertise and connections, or had access to multiple stages of capital. Because when you're trying to build a venture-backed business, it's really important to say, hey, not only say, hey, like like I raised a little bit of capital, isn't that great? You kind of got to look at where you want to get to, and then map backward.
Yeah.
And say,
that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the capital formation strategy is as important as the technology roadmap is as important as the business development roadmap.
Yeah. Any important dates in your future?
Yeah. So this is a really big year for us. We have some really exciting things coming up. This year's really focused on, now that we have the team together, doing a series of demonstrations of the technology, and then continuing to build, customer trust. We've signed a lot of letters of intent with customers who say, hey, if this existed now, like we would buy power from you, at these rates and, this amount. We also have some paying customers that we'll announce in the coming weeks, months. Yeah. It is pretty exciting. Yeah.
But what are they paying for?
So with this, it's a great question. Yeah. So especially in the space sector, I mean, pretty much like any technology sector, there's kind of like prototyping and development phase, and then there's like the kind of commercial products and services phase. So our customers right now are in that prototyping and demonstration phase. Okay. And then, as we mature and start flying, start putting assets on orbit, then we'll get into the commercial services kind of phases.
So they're sort of investing in you as well, those initial customers?
Yeah. It's developing, it's technology development, right? You gotta work together with everybody to sort of get through the various valleys of death, and then deliver these great new kind of products and services. Yeah.
That's great.
That's very exciting. I don't know about you, but I want to
You know a little about me.
I mean, a little bit. Yeah. And then I ignore you and say, no, let's make this more about me.
That's right.
But I want to make this a little bit more about Andrew. And I would like to play a little game.
Are we going to do this?
We are going to do this.
Okay, let's do it.
I want our audience to understand a little bit more about you.
Okay.
And we want to put you on the spot.
Great.
You're welcome. So we're going to play word association.
Right.
It can also be sentence association or paragraph association, but not two paragraph association.
Yeah, we'll cut you off at a certain point.
Right. You've heard me talk, so you're like, okay, just give me this soundbite.
Concise.
Yeah.
But we want you to think of the very first thing that comes to your mind when we say a word or a phrase. This is not a pop quiz. I mean, it kind of sort of is in its own right, but this is just to get to know the first thing that is in your brain. And then we're going to judge you for it.
Great.
We'll tell you
I look forward to that.
How we're judging you.
Great.
I'll do like the emperor's thumb.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
I believe you have the first one.
Okay. Elon Musk.
Falling from grace.
Aliens, AKA New Jersey UFOs.
We wouldn't see them if they were here.
Tang.
Really tasty.
Space diplomacy.
Starship Troopers.
Space settlements.
Star Trek.
Space balls.
Jim Bridenstine.
Running 1987, directed by Mel Brooks.
Yeah, I love
Didn't know if I was going to need to like bring you back, but you passed that test.
Wonderful.
That was the movie that inspired where Andrew is today.
So we, obviously sci-fi was really popular in the space community. We still to this day, and it started at our previous companies, but in the interview process, we would ask people like Star Trek or Star Wars.
Yeah.
And
Is there a right answer?
So
good question.
I have a right answer.
It's Star Trek.
And Mike Snyder, my co-founder, has a right answer, which is Star Wars.
Okay.
So folks always pretty much, it was kind of a house divided.
Yeah.
But we do occasionally get people that will throw out interesting answers. Basically, the only wrong answer is no answer. Some folks have said Babylon 5.
Not as good as Star Trek.
Some folks have said Battlestar Galactica, which, it's acceptable. Yeah.
It's acceptable.
Yeah. But so Jim Bridenstine, who was the leader of NASA under President Trump in the previous administration. It's a great guy. He was asked this question because this isn't just a thing that's exclusive to us at Starcatcher. And his answer was Spaceballs.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
I love that so much. It's a great movie. I want to now dig in to your background. Obviously, we stalked you on LinkedIn.
Wonderful.
Everybody does it. It's acceptable. And we noticed that you have a bachelor's from UNF.
That's right.
In physics. Mm-hmm. And then you went on to get your JD and became a patent lawyer.
That's right.
It's a bit unique, and I'm sure you've heard that one before. Explain yourself.
Yeah. So, my mother temporarily would have said that I was falling from grace as well when that occurred. So I, in undergrad here at University of North Florida, had a company in addition to taking classes. We sold airsoft guns and redneck toys like samurai swords and things like that. It was super fun. And I went to a professor here at UNF, and I said, "Hey, like I love space, I love physics. Like I wanted to be a cosmologist for a good amount of time, but I also love this business stuff. This is really fun."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, there's some folks that have physics degrees that go into law. They go become a patent lawyer. And maybe that would be interesting." And I was like, "Oh," and I looked into it and I was like, "Okay, this is actually like a pretty interesting merger, like being a lawyer, which can be very entrepreneurial, like the marriage of that with my, my love of technology and of space." Yeah. I went and took the LSAT, kind of the law school entrance exam and got into Stetson, which is down in Gulfport, in the Tampa St. Pete area. And really, really enjoyed that. But I really also wanted to stay in space and wanted to work in the space sector. So when I was in law school, I called like every single space company that I could find, like the number for the CEO or the general counsel, and because I was looking for like a summer internship, and I said, "Hey, like I have these skills. Like I worked at a solid state research lab here at UNF. I have had a little bit of experience with like liquid nitrogen and things like that, and I love space, and I'm also like going to become a lawyer, and I can write patent applications for you because the patent bar is actually separate from the lawyer bar." And so I found a company that would like gave me a summer internship. They were actually out in Mojave, California, which is 2.5 hours from anything in California, like from LA, and everything else. It's like in the middle of the desert, but it's where all these like at the time all these like rocket and space companies were forming and doing interesting things. And so I got on one end of I-10 here in Jacksonville, and I drove to the other end of I-10 in LA, and then I went and got my sort of first job in the space sector, starting to do lawyer things, patent lawyer things, and then eventually took the bar and practiced for several years.
Does it help you today?
Absolutely. I think that having the mix of background that I have, both the technical and then the the legalistic / commercial, really has helped me not only avoid paying for lawyers, but understanding sort of the rhythms and the boundaries of business practice. So because from like with science and engineering, you're sort of pushing against the boundaries of the physical universe, and then the law is kind of the same way. You have the Constitution, state and local laws, federal laws, and that's a boundary that you got to operate with it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself within Starcatcher being able to go for any patents in what you're doing?
Absolutely. So we have a few patent applications pending right now.
Excellent.
And we'll continue to build out that portfolio. I really deeply believe, and this is borrowing shamelessly from a buddy of mine, that you shouldn't have your business model shouldn't require you to win a Nobel Prize. But we're doing a bunch of really inventive things, right? We're combining things in new and interesting ways, things that work in space or can't or will be easy to make work in space.
Yeah.
But also putting them together in a way that, provides this really unique service.
It's fascinating.
Agreed.
I know you're dying to get to this topic.
I forget what it was, though.
Arash wants to be controversial now.
Okay,
great.
Let's do it.
Remember, he had said previously,
Oh,
the McDonald's that could be seen up in space makes him very nervous. This is theoretical. It hasn't happened yet.
Right.
But you have thought.
I'm getting nervous right now.
I know. I can tell.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
you're more of
guess
a Starbucks guy.
Actually, yes.
it's long. That's a long conversation. This may not apply, but there's a quote that I heard that we're living in a dystopia with none of the aesthetic.
It's one of my favorites.
And I guess part of me fears like the commercialization of space is headed towards the worst possible outcomes, where we don't get this beauty of the technology. We just sort of get the logos and the industrialization of it all. I guess I'm just wanting to hear your thoughts. Appease me, make me feel like if with you in charge, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of sci-fi, as we were talking about a little bit earlier. And a lot of folks were really disappointed with the outcomes of the Apollo era, because we thought that we were going to get flying cars and moon bases and
Absolutely.
Vacationing on
I'm
Mars.
still waiting for mine.
And instead we got like TikTok.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin. And one of the reasons that's where the world ended up is that we did amazing things in the Apollo era. Absolutely amazing things. But that first golden age of space was really motivated by national pride. And with a side of like the military industrial complex, because if I can put people on the moon, then I can put a bunch of nukes on Moscow and vice versa.
Right.
So once we got to the moon, there wasn't the national pride was satisfied, and hey, I got a big rocket and I can do that. I can do those weapon things.
Right.
Today, we are in the second golden age of space, and it's not just underpinned by national pride, wanting to occasionally caring about beating the Chinese. But it's motivated by the recognition of the things that we can do in space that enrich all of our lives. Like all of us, every single moment in our life, space is helping us. Like the GPS constellation is not just the thing that helps Uber like get you from point A to point B. It's also a universal clock that drives our entire banking system, that makes sure the money leaves your bank account, gets to somebody else's bank account without it being having some terrible snafu.
Can it just come into my bank account?
That's right. I think that's what some folks are trying to do in this case. But this second golden age of space is motivated not just by that national pride and by the innate desire that we have as humans to like explore the universe and understand where we came from and how things work, but also by this recognition that we can do really interesting things that enrich humans, that we can commercialize, that we and we can grow and we can expand, our place in the universe. And that makes it more enduring. Folks have done really amazing things in taking the technology in your smartphones and using that to make satellites that don't cost $100 million; they cost $100,000. Like the folks at Planet Lab, for instance, that's what they did. They took these giant remote sensing satellites that took pictures of the Earth occasionally for NOAA and national security folks, and made little bread boxes that could take pictures and enable us all to kind of see and to do lots of interesting, conservationist things, do lots of interesting commercialization things. And so today where we are is, we're just scratching the surface, figuring out that we can manufacture things in space, that we can make we can do drug discovery. We can make stronger metals. We can make more interesting optical fibers, and we're expanding our ability to communicate with one another using space.
So explain that. Like how do you have new drug discoveries in space that you can't have?
Yeah.
Or interesting fibers, as you said.
Yeah. So space has two or three really unique properties that we don't have on the Earth. One is a basically limitless source of energy from the sun. That's what one of the things we're leveraging at Starcatcher. The other is microgravity. And when you take gravity sort of out of the manufacturing equation, you can make really interesting things. Like you will like if you're doing alloys with metals that with wildly different mass elements, they don't pull apart and settle out because gravity is pulling on them. They just form up, and so we can make stronger alloys. And they actually showed that all the way back on Apollo 14. Same thing with drugs.
And then when you bring it back to Earth,
you do that when it's in a molten state, and then it solidifies, and then
you can bring it right back.
Exactly.
We can use it.
Yes. And then from a drug discovery perspective, it's really the same principle that we build these really complex crystals to do drug delivery in your body more effectively, or proteins that kind of wind or unwind themselves. And when you build those things in microgravity, it's easier for them to do those things. And then we can, and then they kind of solidify, and we can bring them back to Earth and study them or utilize them. And we're just like scratching the surface of that. So I think the reason we're not going to go to that, dystopia without the aesthetic is because we have folks that say, hey, there are really interesting things we can do with space. And there's been enough commercialization that it's cheaper now for us to go to space.
How far away? I don't even know if this is the right
I'm
question.
dying for the timeline question to be answered.
We're going to have a manufacturing plant of alloys on the moon in the next 6 years. Like when? Or is Big Pharma going to set up their labs?
Right. I think that it's within the next 10 years we will have meaningful manufacturing in low Earth orbit, and then we will kind of expand out from there. I think we will see folks, hopefully, the first woman and the next man return to the moon's surface via the Artemis program.
I want to circle back to that because I just heard some news.
Certainly.
I don't want to.
Yeah,
derail.
I think we'll see that, but the moon, the commercialization of the moon and the commercialization of Mars is a little further off. I really think that we'll first see low Earth orbit kind of get built out, and then the activity there that will further drive down the cost of launch and the cost of operation. Right? Having more rockets going up means it costs less to put stuff up. Having more satellites going up means it costs less to build satellites. Having a power grid in space means it costs less to power and operate all those things. Sure. And then you can use all of that great savings and economy of scale to go and commercialize the moon and go on.
So you do anticipate that within the next 10 years, we're going to see something great that's actually happening, and we will either manufacture something that we'll be able to use down here, or we'll be able to further space missions in space because you won't have to worry about where the power is going to come from. What about flying cars? Like, what is this a race? Are we going to ever have flying cars? Is that going to be one of those things where I'm pretty sure the Chinese did do some sort of a prototype and demonstrated it. But it's like, where is everything going, and what is actually going to be achievable?
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things about kind of future prediction and
we will hold these against you.
Yeah, that's fine. No. Well, so reading like science fiction or things that say, hey, in 30 years we're going to have X, Y, and Z, and then looking at that versus where we are is really interesting because like from a sort of visceral perspective, it's like a little bit sad that I don't have a Jetsons car.
Yes.
At the same time, we do have amazing technologies that keep us connected in ways that we never really imagined before. We have great medical technologies that help people stay, live, wonderful and full and healthy lives. Like my wife and one of my children are both type 1 diabetics. And the technology that in the last 10 years that has evolved to make that go from a disease that's difficult to deal with to a disease that means they're just kind of like cyborgs, right? They always have, a constant glucose monitor on and a pump on, but they're living, normal lives. Like, is really amazing.
What do you hope your child will see? Now that you mentioned, that's what I wanted to know. Like, you were talking 10 years.
Yeah.
And what do you hope for the future for your kids?
I hope that they will have available to them boring jobs in space. Because if there are boring jobs in space, like accountants and lawyers, that means that there's a level of people living and working in space that are, that we've fully settled.
Yeah.
At least a part of it.
Right.
Also, those jobs won't be super boring because you get a great view.
How does that realistically work? I mean, how do you actually settle space? You're imagining, are these giant spaceships? Are we on the moon with infrastructure and buildings?
Yeah.
Are we going to inhabit a planet or live in a thing?
So there are a couple of things that I don't think everybody really knows or everybody really viscerally understands. But any person that is 24 or younger has lived their entire lives with people living and working in space. Because the International Space Station, which depending on the day has 6 to 12 people, sometimes a few more on it, has been operating, since 2000, 2001. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
That actually is we went from 0 to 1 on pioneering a place.
Right.
Now it's hard and it's expensive. And it currently requires, the effort of a nation to keep that place flying and operating. But we also live in an area now where there are multiple tourists a year that go hang out on the space station for a week. We live in an era where there are folks that there are dozens of folks now a year that go up on rockets that kind of duplicate what Alan Shepard experienced, like the parabolic flight that go up and come back down. And so, there's that kind of tourism element, which, that's people love to go and explore. Plus all of these great, kind of industrial uses that I was mentioning earlier. So I think we'll see those things kind of synergistically continue to develop, plus the reduction in launch costs and the increased availability of things that can take people safely up and down.
Yeah.
And things that can take, hardware up and down robotically that we can use to do research and development and production. Those things will all just kind of have a virtuous cycle to get us to a place where, I fully believe that, my children will have the ability to, choose a boring job in space.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll convince my wife to take a retirement trip to low Earth orbit one day.
Oh, how the conversations change if that were to take place. Do you imagine that one day we're just going to oh, excuse you, Green Martian? Let's get into that. I have to know. I mean, I'm definitely a bit of a conspiracy theorist. I just love the art of the possible. And if you don't know something, then anything's possible. So living in the industry that you do, lots of, obviously, science fiction that's driving this. But what's Andrew's personal opinion?
That's classified. No,
that's one of the jokes he has with the seed funders.
But I would. Okay, look, I'm a big believer that they're in a universe as expansive as ours. I think it's absolutely reasonable to think that there are other intelligent species that exist or have existed.
Right.
And this is a little bit of kind of a human-centric view, but I think if they did exist, I think if they exist, they probably haven't visited us yet, because just as how a human kind of, because they would be much more technologically advanced than us to travel between star systems.
Yeah.
And just as we, as the sort of technological, apex predator on the planet, when we see other species on our planet, we don't tiptoe around them and not let them know we're here.
Right.
If little kids, they see an ant pile and they'll go explore the ant pile, and without regard of the ants seeing them.
Yeah.
And so I think that to the extent that aliens exist,
Oh, I love that. So they're messing with us the same way a kid messes with an ant pile. And we're like, that was just a hurricane.
Yeah, but I think it would just be overt, right? Like, I think they would show up and they'd be like, hey, what are you guys with your weird 2 legs or whatever? However, we're different or unique. And, maybe they like our cinema. Maybe they think it's, drivel. But I think there would be no reason for them to be clandestine about it.
Yeah. They just want to play with the ant pile.
Right. And because we don't see them in the sky, I think that's a pretty positive indicator that they haven't actually visited us.
Yeah. All right. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Good. I mean, is there anything you want to touch on?
I think that one thing I would touch on is I this is the third space company that I've had the pleasure of building or scaling in Jacksonville. And Jacksonville is an area that I think is kind of unsung or underappreciated. And I've convinced a decent number of folks to move here and build really cool stuff.
So we should blame you.
If you want to blame me, that's fine. But really, Jacksonville is this place where, it's very kind of choose your own adventure, right? Like, and it's great for folks of almost all kind of stages of life, right? If you're an early career individual, we have places with great nightlife, with, very walkable areas, with, that you can meet lots of folks. We have both a river and an ocean.
I know.
And like, that's really fun. We have an occasionally good professional football team, and we're really excited for the next season. Yeah. And like, we're always excited for the next season.
Everyone's very hopeful right now.
Yes. And we have things like a professional orchestra and things like that. So we have kind of big city accoutrements.
Yes.
For honestly small city prices.
And a small town feel.
Yes.
Because everyone knows everybody.
Yes. Yeah. It is. It is interesting because both Jacksonville is simultaneously, to your point, Jen, both large and small.
Yeah.
It's just like the space industry, actually. It's like this, I feel like it's the same, several dozen people that, I run into a lot, but it's a huge industry across the nation. And so, I think, and there are great companies here in town, not just awesome space companies, but there's really brilliant people that have done, quite amazing things.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent that's here that I don't think people recognize. One of our coworkers, she gets very angry when she hears people say that Jacksonville could be a great innovation hub or a great tech hub, because she's like, hi, does no one realize where we are right now and what we've accomplished here in Jacksonville? Yeah. She is of the belief that this is a tech center. This is an innovation hub. Yep. And I have to agree, when you think about the different companies that are here in Jacksonville, there's some big names, and we have organizations that are doing some pretty fascinating things like Starcatcher. And I just don't think we get the notoriety and credibility because it's down in Florida.
Yep. And, I think one of the things that COVID really showed is, in the tech world especially, we're already sort of starting to see the cracks of the myth that you had to be in Silicon Valley to be worth anything in tech. But COVID just absolutely shattered that.
It did.
And I really think that you can build a great company with folks anywhere. And you don't have to be in Silicon Valley. You don't have to be in New York. And people are doing that here in Jacksonville. And so and honestly, Silicon Valley has a lot, like, it's got a lot of tailwinds, but it's also got a lot of headwinds from a building a team perspective, from a cost of living and the cost of basically everything else perspective.
Right.
And it really is important to, when you're building a company, to take care of your team and make sure that they have a good and comfortable life. And I think Jacksonville is a great place to do that, as well as having a concentration of folks that are really talented. So you can hire, and we hire folks from here. We also hire folks from all over the nation. Mm-hmm. And once people see Jacksonville, once we kind of tell them about it, it's pretty easy to convince them to come do cool stuff here.
We've experienced the same. We've relocated a couple of people, and they're happy to.
Yeah.
Because there's the variety, I think, that's offered that you don't get in many other cities, in your big cities, but that comes with the huge cost of living. So yeah, I can appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go a little bit deeper into Andrew. You've done some other cool stuff. I have a note here that you've actually spoken at the UN World Space Forum. So I want to that is so intimidating. I'm very thankful you agreed to come and talk to us nobodies. But now entertain us with what that was like.
Oh, yeah. So it's really interesting to speak, at UN organized events. That particular one was in Bonn. And yeah, I mean, the UN it's fascinating to be in a forum like that, to talk about an area that I'm very passionate about and very familiar with, and to folks that are also interested in it, but maybe don't know as much, and then have these areas of incredible expertise in, and concern about hey, how do we make sure that folks all over the globe like have access or can experience this second golden age of space that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And having them kind of challenge your assumptions in those ways is really, it's an honor to do that. And that was a fun one from that perspective.
That I still don't know how you were able to. I know you were with a bunch of other smart people, so I personally would have been incredibly intimidated to be in a room full of that many smart people.
Oh yeah,
you are smart yourself, obviously.
Oh no,
not downplaying that, but that's a different forum. Literally, that's a very different stage to be on. What are some of your insecurities when you get into a room of people like that? Do you ever have the I don't belong? Do you feel like an imposter?
I was telling someone the other day that this gentleman that was on a panel with me a couple of weeks ago, and he was like very nervous, and I told him, I said, hey, I'm actually like basically as nervous as you are. You just get used to it after a while, and you just kind of use that as fuel to sort of drive you forward and say and be focused. I for a long time in this industry, I was just totally intimidated by every astronaut that I met. I basically like had to become good friends with a couple of astronauts before I was like, okay,
just to demystify.
They're people, and they, they're sort of like, hey, just be cool, man, like, and yeah, and it's really, so that's a lot of fun. I'm still groups of like venerated physicists. I'm still absolutely just like, you guys are awesome. I'm just over here. I'm some lawyer that got lost on the way to the courthouse and wound up here doing space.
Do you feel like that group of people are accepting of like the work that you're doing, or are they like, what are you doing?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. It's one of the things I love about the space sector is that it is a team sport. And actually, I stole that shamelessly from Jeff Bezos. He gave this speech at Space Symposium, which is this big conference in the space sector, like 8 years ago. And he like said that, and this always just really stuck with me because it is true. Like there of every industry I've ever like been involved with or help or assisted folks in, it is the epitome of the phrase like, hey, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, you got to go together.
So even competitors are just sort of like,
yeah,
the passion of it all sort of spurs them forward.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're all rowing in the same direction at the end of the day. You'll see when SpaceX has a launch failure, the CEO of one of their competitors, this gentleman named Tory Bruno, like he'll publicly and privately be reaching out and saying, hey, we can help you, and they take that help, and vice versa. And that's
encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, that is, and in the same way, like
it should be.
People have successes. They, we all try to celebrate it, right? Because at the end of the day, like we're all motivated to achieve the utopian visions of space, and we know that this is like the first inning.
Do you guys have conversations about how to prevent the dystopian images of space? Like we have that conversation with AI all the time.
Yeah.
Is that happening within the space industry too?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that that care deeply about preventing some of the negative outcomes with space. There was a movie a few years ago called Gravity, Alfonso Cuarón, that featured an event called the Kessler syndrome, which is like a satellite breaks up and its pieces hit other satellites, and then that hits more. And it's this cascade that
we're stuck in Earth.
that just pollutes low Earth orbit, and we can't get out. And so that's something that we put a lot of energy in talking about. Hey, how do we control space debris, both from a what are good policies for how do we control our satellites, and also how do we clean up the stuff that's up there already. There are also a lot of folks that are very thoughtful about weapons in space. The United States signed a treaty in the 60s that bans nuclear weapons from being in space, and many countries have signed that treaty. So these are the things that we
But
think
now you're
about.
up there making space lasers.
Space flashlights.
Sorry.
You amped that one up, didn't you?
Yeah, that's a good question that you brought to my mind, which is the role of government and policy in terms of the work that you're doing. Do you find it helpful, intrusive? Like what's the balance that you would like to see?
Yeah. And maybe this is a little bit of like the lawyer in me coming out, but I think it's important to view the laws and regulations and players in the space sector as essentially the environment, as the oceans and the mountains and the air, and that's the playing field that we have to operate in, because it's easy to say, this export control regulation, this is getting in my way of selling to Saudi Arabia or whatever. And if I could only sell to Saudi Arabia, it'd be easy. Well, it turns out that's not really true. That's often just an excuse. And folks really have been very forward leaning over my career in space. I've seen folks in the government, in NASA, in the Department of Defense shift from a kind of, we're going to tell you how to do it, we're going to do it just the way we want to do it, to, hey, commercial industry can, has really insightful views, can bring other resources to bear. And if I can hitch a ride on the same kind of rocket that flies, remote sensing and telecommunications satellites to space, I can get a cheaper rocket. So then I can do more space exploration, or I can do more.
Right.
And then that creates that virtuous cycle. And so in that regard, we really are seeing that in the regulation and posture of our customers and of our partners in the U.S. government.
That's great.
Yeah, that's very hopeful too. Man, you guys really know how to do business in this industry. Well, I mean, we have the saying that data science is a team sport, and we are not in this business to cut anybody down. We don't view competition as a bad thing. We should all be learning from each other, because what we're trying to accomplish, we still don't even know how everything should be used, and the technology is changing on a daily basis. So if we're not trying to do this together, then I think everything just falls apart. So it's really nice and encouraging. I did want to I had the one question about, you said Artemis. I just heard there's going to be some layoffs at Boeing, and they were actually pulling people from that program. I don't know anything more about it. I haven't done any of the digging. Have you heard? What does this mean?
So the Artemis program, which for those, I guess, listening who don't know what it is, it's the program, it's the human spaceflight program to return American astronauts to the moon, to land, put folks back on the moon, and this time to stay. First woman, next man on the moon, and then beyond. It's a unique program in that it survived the transition of multiple administrations. Usually, like human spaceflight programs, like new president comes in, they usually get redirected or substantially changed or cut. So it started under President Trump, and then President Biden kept it going, and now we're here again.
Yeah.
There are folks that are looking at the architecture associated with it. So Boeing makes a big rocket called the Space Launch System, or SLS. And there's some questions about whether or not that rocket is the best rocket for for doing like sustained missions to the moon. I personally think that I personally think that we will see that rocket fly a couple more times.
Okay.
And likely be the rocket that takes people to the moon, and then they'll ride down to the surface on either a SpaceX or a Blue Origin lunar lander.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a vehicle that is kind of the last of its kind in that it is largely a government-directed development program compared to the modern commercially directed development programs that have yielded SpaceX's Falcon 9, Rocket Lab's Electron, Stoke Space's vehicles, Blue Origin's vehicles, all of these amazing rockets that are online or coming online at much lower price points and in some cases much lower price points, much higher utilization than what SLS is.
So it's not going to slow things down, or do we anticipate maybe it will?
We hope it doesn't. I would say we hope that the transition from one administration to the next doesn't slow things down. That's a hope that we almost eternally have in the space industry. Because we can do a lot more with certainty than we can with cloudiness. We're not always we don't always achieve that vision.
No, I completely get it. I think we feel similarly in our industry as well. I think there are times where just having a little bit of certainty and clarity can get you a long way. And you just need a decision to be made.
Right.
Andrew, if you could give one tip, thought, piece of advice, motivation to a guy or gal who's kind of has like an idea that they're just scratching on a piece of paper and they don't know what to do with it, like what would be your thought to them?
Talk about the idea with as many people as you can. Like get out there and swing the bat. Because in my experience, luck is mostly about just interacting with as many different folks and areas as possible, and then serendipity.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, Arash, I think it's that time.
Are we done?
I think
I can go for another hour.
I know. I have so many more questions. But
we didn't ask what was more interesting in space.
We didn't ask what?
What Andrew thought was more interesting in space. We don't have to ask that. We can just leave that as a cliffhanger.
And maybe we get to have him back.
Yeah. Ooh.
We can do a deeper dive.
That's a deeper lift. Because you're going into space, maybe.
Okay. Good try.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, what was the most, encouraging thing you've heard today?
Well, I'll say this. When this was an aha moment, when Andrew was talking towards the end there, and he was discussing that space is part of our environment. I don't know why that light bulb never clicked for me.
Yeah.
Like it's like the oceans or the air we breathe or the trees.
It's there, even though you can't see it.
Because even though you can express the beauty of space, that is sort of like, oh yeah, it is our environment.
Yeah.
Like Earth exists within this thing called space.
Right. No, I really liked hearing that. It is a nice reminder. You don't think of it like that. And I think it's probably because the movies and the TV shows that make this so unreal, you can feel the fantasy in it, and you have this hope that it is real, but then you don't get to walk out your front door and see the moon that's just right across the street.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed hearing that industry comes together and they support one another. I think can the rest of this world figure that out? That'd be really great because we would accomplish so much more. So that was really encouraging to hear that they do support each other and they're not just in it to, make all the money in the world because they're making
just some of the money.
I mean, that's entirely fair too. Everyone should get to make their own. I hope that our listeners realize that you can do anything. I mean, if Andrew can come from being a goalkeeper for his high school soccer team, transition into pole vaulting, to get a degree in physics, to become a patent lawyer, literally, for him, the sky is the limit.
Oh, that's a nice one. Good job. All right, I think that's a wrap.
I think that's a wrap.